Well, hello my sugar beasties, it's Janine here and you're watching That's Cakeable. Now for this week's tutorial, I cannot take the credit design. The original of this cake was made by a cake artist I absolutely admire and I wanted to give it a go. I'm probably royally going to butcher this, but I believe the name of the artist is Tortik Annuchka. I'll put a link in the description below where you can find their amazing, incredible, mind-blowing work. This week's cake incorporates textures like woodgrain and marble. And to top it off, I've included an incredibly simple Isomalt sail. Word of warning, however, make sure that you use gloves when using hot sugar. I did it again. While you're here, I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel by just hitting that little button below and hit the notification bell so you're informed every time I upload a new video. It's totally free. Well, that's enough rambling for me. Let's get on with the tutorial. So for this project, I'm starting with a cake that is 8 inches high and 6 inches round that I have already ganached. I'll put a link in the description to show you how I ganache my round cakes for nice sharp edges. Now I'm using painter's tape to mark off where I'm going to put the gold leaf on this cake, but in hindsight I would have done this very differently. I would have used this still, the amazing More Moist, but I would have sprayed it on a piece of wafer paper that was the width and length of the circumference of the cake where I wanted to add the gold leaf, and I would have attached the gold leaf directly to the wafer paper that attached that to the cake. Instead, I did it this way, which still worked, but if you're going to learn from my mistakes, well, it's better that I muck it up first and you do it the easy way. I just went around then and used my gold leaf to fill in that space between the two pieces of painter's tape. Like I said, with wafer paper, I just would have wrapped it around and attached to the cake with a little bit of More Moist. Then I removed the painter's tape and I had my gold leaf stripe in the center of the cake ready to go. Don't worry about the messy pieces of gold leaf. If you do it this way, you will not see them. Now I'm measuring from the base of my cake to where the gold leaf begins and from the top of my cake to where the gold leaf starts. I've taken some baking paper and I've measured the width of my cake, the circumference, and the height from the base to the top, and cut out a piece of paper that wraps all the way around and just hits that gold piece, slightly overlapping it. You want to do exactly the same for the top. At the top you want it to overlap the gold but leave a little ridge at the top here so that we can cut that off flush with the cake. Now what I've got here is just some white fondant that I'd rolled out very thinly and let dry overnight. I'm breaking that all up. And then I place it in my amazing coffee grinder. This coffee grinder is used for cakes only. You may have seen me use it before. I place those pieces of fondant into the coffee grinder and grind it on up. We are left with powdered white fondant. Just place that into a bowl and I do exactly the same with some black fondant that I've also let dry. Now I'm taking some black fondant and kneading it. And to that I add the white dried ground up fondant. You'll need quite a bit to get the effect in the black fondant, a lot less when you go to the white. Just keep adding it and kneading the fondant until you're happy with how it looks. The best way to check this is to just roll out a section and see if you like the effect. Clearly I wanted more here, so I added a little bit more and just kept going until I was happy. That's much better. Folded that up, placed it aside into a ziploc bag until I was ready for it. Then of course, like I said, I went ahead and did the same thing with the white, adding a lot less black. You don't need too much black because of course it's in white fondant. Now I've taken the black fondant with the white in it and I've rolled that into a sausage, and I'm doing the same with the white. Pushing them together, and then with my rolling pin I just roll them out. This way they're nice and attached to one another. Now this is going on the base of the cake, so you want to make sure that it's long enough and high enough that it's going to fit onto that template we've made with the baking paper. I use the baking paper template to cut the excess off the black and white fondant. And I wanted a little more white in that black, so I'm just sprinkling some on and rolling it in with my rolling pin. Much happier with that effect. Then I'm taking some vegetable shortening and I put a good layer of that over the baking paper, and I place that on to my now black and white piece of fondant. Now a bit of a hot tip here, check both sides of the fondant, they're going to look different. Decide which side you like the look of better and place the baking paper on top of that side. I'm then taking my little pizza cutter and just cutting off any excess that's accumulated. Move that aside, and then what I'm going to do is just place some vegetable shortening around the base of the cake where that's going to attach. I hold that baking paper with the fondant attached to it at the edge of the cake and slowly wrap that around, attaching it with my hand as I go. This sort of works like a transfer. Remove that baking paper, and voila, it's on. Now I'm taking some light brown fondant here and I'm adding some white pieces to it. Just thin pieces of white fondant, and I'm firstly layering them up. I just wanted a different sort of effect, so I just played with some ideas here. A thicker piece of brown, a thinner piece of white, thicker piece of brown, thinner piece of white, laid them on top of each other. Squished it all down, and then rolled it out. I rolled it and I flipped it and I rolled it and I flipped it and folded, and added some more white fondant later on until I was happy with the effect that I got in that fondant. You can play around with any methods you like, but this is what I ended up liking. And I popped that aside. I wanted another wood grain sort of look, so I've added some hazelnut magic colors food color here. And just kneaded it in slightly, so it ended up a lot more marbled. Rolled that out. So I now have two wood grain pieces that look very different from one another. And I laid that underneath the first piece. Now just a plain piece of white fondant, and I'm taking a wire brush. I'll show it to you right here. There it is. And I'm just running it across that fondant to give it some more texture. This whole cake is about texture, so I wanted some more texture. And then I cut off the edges of all of those pieces of fondant and place them all together. Cutting off any excess. Using my rolling pin and roll them all together so that they stuck together well. Checking them against my template for the top section of the cake, and I'm just using my ruler here, my quilting ruler, to make that edge nice and straight. And then I did exactly the same thing around the top section of the cake. Now at this point I've also added fondant to the very top of the cake. I'll put a link in the description of how I do that on panelled cakes. I wrapped it around, cut off the excess. and where it joined, I just smoothed the seam together. Now at this stage I decided I wanted some wood grain on the base section, so the joy of vegetable shortening is I was able to remove that piece. I then added some wood grain to that base piece of fondant and attached it to the other two pieces, just like this. Took that template that I'd originally used that I had scrunched up, but it still worked fine, and just followed the exact same steps and reattached it to the base of the cake. It worked like a charm and looks so much better in my opinion. I then just take a long flat blade and cut off that excess at the top, that little lip that we left available at the top to make sure that the cake was nice and flush. And that was the cake done. Now let's make the topper. And yep, I burned myself again. Please wear gloves, I can't stress it enough, and I'm going to remind myself to do the same in future. I've just melted down some Isomalt here, and I'm pouring it out onto a Teflon sheet. With my glove on. I just roll it around a little on the Teflon sheet and wait till it's slightly set, and then I'm just leaning it over a bottle to let the Isomalt drip down the sides a little. I just find this way a lot easier myself. I've seen many methods, I've tried many other methods, I've even used other methods in tutorials, but this way was the best for me. Now once that had dripped a little, I set it aside, let it cool a little bit more until it was pliable, and then I hand molded it into a little cup shape. A little bit out of shot here, I apologize, but just like that. I set it upside down and just let it set. Once it had set, I removed the Teflon sheet. And that's what I was left with. Absolutely gorgeous. I've just placed a little bit of Isomalt on the top of the cake that I torched to melt a little. And it did burn a little. I went a little overboard, but it still worked. And then I just took my Isomalt sail and placed it on top. Because it's attached with hot sugar that's now cooled, that ain't going anywhere. Just added a few other little pieces of sugar in there to make it a bit more interesting, and added some gold dust powder. And that was it, guys. That's how I made this marbled, textured, wood grain, gold leaf cake with a Isomalt sail. And that is it, guys. That's how you create this multi-textured cake with an Isomalt sail. Once again, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell so you're informed every time I upload new content. Also, if you like this tutorial, I'd love if you could give it a thumbs up, as it helps me grow my channel. Are we done, boys? No, clearly not. Well guys, thank you so much for joining me again this week. Any questions or comments? That's what that box below us is for. I'd love to hear from you. Also, if you make any of the cakes that I create here on my channel, I would love to see them. Just make sure to tag That's Cakeable on Instagram. The link is below so I can see your beautiful work. Well, thank you for joining me again. It's your turn now, and you know the drill. It's time for you to go and get your cake on. I'll see you next time, guys. Bye-bye.